Chris Bedford caught up with Rachel Bovard to talk about how fast the Senate was moving on Trump's nominees early on and why that momentum seems to have stalled in recent weeks.
Joining me now is Rachel Bovard, the Vice President for Programs at the Conservative Partnership Institute and a longtime friend of the show. Madam Vice President, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you're also, in addition to just a master of ceremonies and someone who knows the ins and outs of Washington, D.C. very well, a hard-fought veteran of the U.S. Senate, which I say hard-fought because it can be harrowing to be in there. Long, long days, and a lot of people don't always seem to want to work. So I want to talk to you today about nominations. Everyone's been crowing, happily so, rightly so in some ways, about how quickly the Senate Majority Leader and the Republicans were able to move through President Trump's nominations to cabinet posts, his top nominations, and how many of them actually got through when the Senate initially was, for whatever Republican reason, balking at huge numbers of them. But it seems like they've lagged since. And there are a lot more nominations that actually need to go through. You have deputy secretaries of defense. You've got the ambassador to Great Britain. Right now, we're in trade talks with Great Britain. Right now, there are wars going on in Europe, and there's always war brewing somewhere in the Middle East or possibly with Iran. And of course, you've got the Pacific. These seem like important posts to fill. How many are on the calendar now who've already worked their way out of committee? And what is going on?
The Senate is regressing to the mean, is what is going on. So John Thune, who is the Senate Republican Majority Leader, deserves some credit, I think, for confirming Trump's cabinet very swiftly. And he made that clear to the conference he was going to do that. Trump put a ton of pressure on him to do it. And so did the base. You know, Trump had picked these amazing people. People wanted them confirmed as fast as possible. And it's easier to make the Senate do its job when there's just a ton of attention and spotlight on them. And you saw that with the cabinet. These are incredibly high-profile picks. And even some of the sub-cabinet, right? Kash Patel at FBI, Tulsi Gabbard, all these people, through the strength of their fame, right? They're within Trump orbit and also the pressure from the president, they got through fairly quickly. But now that pressure is off. Right? You have other priorities moving. You have senators who have worked harder than they ever had in their lives. They are exhausted, and they're reverting to the mean. They're to form, which is essentially back to their 2.5-day work week. They don't want to work past 5 o'clock ever on Thursdays. They definitely want to be done by 1 o'clock. And so that's kind of the energy that you're seeing is dwindling. And what's resulted is this pile of nominations. So what happens in the Senate is the White House selects a nomination, they send it to the Senate. The nomination then has to be referred to its committee of jurisdiction. The committee will then have a hearing with the nominee, and then they'll mark up or vote and report out that nomination. Once the nomination is out of committee, it goes on something called the executive calendar of business. So there are two calendars in the Senate, because in the Senate, we deal with both legislative business and executive business, which is considered nominations and treaties, right? That's unique to the Senate. The House of Representatives doesn't deal with that. So you have your calendar of business, which is all the legislation, and then your executive calendar, which has nominations on it. So the nominations come out of committee, they go on the calendar, and right now we're looking at roughly 30 nominations that are on the calendar just waiting for consideration. Because once a nomination's on the calendar, it is up to the Senate Majority Leader, effectively. Technically, any senator can move to them, but they defer all that authority to the leader. It's up to him, right? And he controls the floor schedule. And I think what's also frustrating about this, backlog that we're seeing is that we are in the post-nuclear era of the executive calendar, which is, in layman's terms, the filibuster doesn't exist anymore for nominations. It doesn't exist for judicial nominations, and it doesn't exist for cabinet nominations.
It's just a TV thing that people do from time to time.
That's right. Well, you still have the filibuster on the legislative side, right? And by filibuster, I mean you have to invoke cloture on a question, which is what everyone hears as the 60-vote requirement. That still exists for legislation. It doesn't exist for nominations anymore. And so what that means is every nomination is actually confirmed at simple majority, but also the rules around the time that has to elapse between invoking cloture on a question and confirmation has also been reduced. So for cabinet, it's 30 hours have to run between when cloture is invoked on the nomination and the nomination is confirmed. And that's a significant amount of time.
So you basically have to finish out the day when cloture is invoked, and then you have to wait a day, and then the next day you can get to work.
Pretty much. But now we're dealing with sub-cabinet, and the 30 hours is reduced to 2. So we're in a situation where the Senate could, let's say they come in at 10 a.m., at 11 a.m., they have a vote on cloture on, the undersecretary for acquisition at DOD. 2 hours later, they could confirm him and move to the next nominee on the calendar. But that we aren't really seeing that pace anymore in the Senate. And, like I said, we're back to this 2.5-day work week where, we'll get around to it when we get around to it. But
Just say in August.
Yeah, and what's suffering is the president's agenda.
Yeah.
Because, that was the argument with the cabinet. We're going to confirm these guys because we want the president's agenda. That's great. And those people are incredibly important to setting that agenda. But who's actually doing all the work? It's the sub-cabinet. It's everybody beneath them. And so they are hamstringing the administration with these kind of delays.
We learned in Trump 45 that the extreme limits you have of the president delegating authority to people who won't execute on it. And then even below that, the cabinet secretary is still making orders, but they're not, unless they're personally overseeing the outcome of this. Sometimes these things just get held up or just not executed at all.
Right. Or, you're in a situation where the acting, whoever's filling in for that person not yet confirmed is a career staff. And we know, you run the gamut of loyalty from career staff, right?
Can you have the nominees as acting until they're confirmed?
You can, but once they're in the confirmation process, so once they're on the calendar, they can't be doing that. They just have to wait
because
for
it could be
confirmation.
anything they do can and will be used against them, sort of thing.
Right. They're not officially in the role and they're waiting for the advice and consent of the Senate. They're in the middle of that process. So these nominees are literally just sitting on the sidelines. I'm sure they're probably weighing in informally on things, but they can't take any official action. And the big things that this administration is doing, and especially, we've seen everything they put out get tied up in the courts. You want to make sure all those T's are crossed and I's are dotted on everything you're doing. So you really are, they're in this sort of interstitial wasteland until waiting for the Senate to move effectively.
Now you see these things be held up in the past. I mean, Senator Jesse Helms was famous for extracting different concessions from different departments based on holding up the nominees and holding up this person and that. Or the opposition party, of course, doesn't want to actually, since the Obama years at least, doesn't want to staff the president's White House. Why? It seems like the Republicans are the ones that are in a post-nuclear era holding this up. Is the reason that they're waiting until after the July 4th recess, when they come back, I guess, before the August recess? Is there a reason why they're trying to wait that long? Is there work on the president's budget, which is essential to his agenda, and that legislative calendar that requires what's holding them back from spending a week on this, or could they walk and chew gum at the same time?
They can do both things at once, and you'll hear arguments, well, the committees need to work on, legislation and reconciliation and all these things. That's true, right? So schedule things, right? Like you're not working on reconciliation every day of the week. A nom hearing takes at most 3 hours, right? Do one a week, put them on the calendar. And then at that point, you're looking at 30 noms with 2 hours that have to run behind them.
And that's if Democrats max you out.
And that's if Democrats max you out, because to this point, that 2 hours is a ceiling, right? It envisions people, it's basically allowing for speaking time. It's saying, okay, we've invoked cloture. Does anyone want to speak on this nomination? Now, there's something called the 1 hour rule, which only basically says if no senator is seeking time, that time can be waived. Now, that requires a lot of work from Republicans to enforce that. And it requires most of them to be on the floor for that process.
Which is hard.
Yeah. The dirty secret in the Senate is that the place that senators hate being the most is the floor of the Senate. They hate working, they hate voting, and they hate being on the floor of the Senate.
Is that because they get rid of the chewing tobacco spittoons?
It might be.
I would need those to come back. I'd work forever.
I will say, I feel like Zinn has taken care of that problem, number one.
Yes, that's true. I've got one right now.
It also never stopped Richard Burr, who was the former senator from North Carolina, I believe. I have a vision of him in my mind that I can never unsee, of a series of late night votes, and he's sitting in his chair in the Senate. It's pushed back, his feet are up on the desk, and he's just rocking a huge dip with a cup. So, and that was maybe 5-6 years ago.
A Dixie cup with a towel put in. Yeah. Old bartenders know how to provide what you need for that.
Yeah. Hope springs eternal and finds a way.
Well, so does Senator Thune basically needs to come in then on a Thursday and say we're switching over to the executive calendar, and then come back on Monday morning or come back on Saturday. I don't think he's going to do that, and say, all right, boys and girls, buckle up. I'm ordering pizza, and you can sit around, and we're going to pass these, and let's see how long the Democrats will sweat it out. Yeah. Is that sort of the tactic that would actually work?
Yes, because when you're looking at 30 nominations is a lot. They only have 2 hours to run behind them. That 2 hours can be shortened if if the Republican conference puts their back into it.
Because Democrats want to go home too.
Yeah, and you could confirm all these nominations in 2 days if you actually put your back into it. And it would require something like you said. Basically, ideally, the Republican conference decides they're giving up a weekend. Right? Because forcing weekend work on the minority party is always a good tactic, right? Because you just want to depress and discourage them from the outset. But, he says to the conference, look, Thursday at 10 a.m., I'm stacking cloture votes. And we're going to be here. Maybe we go home at 10 o'clock tonight, but we're coming back at 9 a.m. the next morning. Or maybe we work through the night and get this over with, even sooner. But he just has to stack them. And then the votes are back to back to back to back. And you keep the conference on the floor because, again, if Democrats aren't using that 2 hours, it can be reduced even further. You give them some libations in the Republican cloakroom. You put, the Thai takeout and the pizza down the hall in the Capitol, and you roll in some cots if you have to, and you just stay and you hustle.
Old.
The average age of the Senate, I think, is like 65 at this point. But you just stay and you do the thing. This is what they're elected to do. They hate it, but they'll hate it until they love it.
But they'll have fun with it. Yeah. It'll be like back in the day, like rugby practice, something like that. I mean, it was miserable at the time, but you look back fondly. That's when you were doing your job. That's when you were getting better. So he could do that. But what powers does the Senate Majority Leader have to make Republicans play ball other than come on, guys? Yeah. I mean, when Senator Thune tried to force his way in the Joint Chiefs nominations, a lot of Republicans just said, I got stuff to do this weekend and went home.
Yeah, it's a point well taken because, John Thune can do this, but it's incumbent upon the Republicans to actually show up. And I think that's where he's got to start ratcheting up the pressure. He's still new to the job. He's already had a couple of tests, getting the budget across the finish line was one of them. But we haven't really seen him have to engage the conference and really twist arms. And this may be a situation where he has to, because some of these guys can probably get confirmed without every Republican, but you can't bank on that. Especially when you're ratcheting up the pressure like this, you're almost ensuring partisan votes on every nomination. So you need every Republican on the floor. And so I think it's something he would need to engage the White House, right? And have the White House get involved and telegraph to the conference how important this is. But also it's a name and shame issue, right? If Thune broadcasts to the country that this is the weekend we're getting this done, this is the weekend there is...
And it's not Masters weekend.
Right. It's not Masters weekend. No nomination left unconfirmed kind of thing. And then the public is watching and he's like, oh yeah, the president's subcabinet didn't get confirmed because, 6 of my guys decided to go skiing this weekend. That's a pretty bad look.
It is a terrible look. Now... But when you need all of your members essentially on the floor doing their jobs, that means you can't be holding these committee hearings and other aspects of the president's agenda or the Senate's agenda in general. But is that the case anyways if you're in the executive calendar, or is that only for votes? Can these committees still be meeting to discuss the budget reconciliation during the executive calendar?
Yeah, the committees can still be meeting. There's something called the 2-hour rule, which says they can't meet, 2 hours after the Senate's convened. That's routinely waived. Committees can be meeting all day. Senators just have to be able to come to the floor and cast their vote. Then they can go back, to their committee business, whether it be a markup or a hearing or whatever. But the Senate is able to do more than one thing at a time. It's able to, move things on the legislative calendar at the same time as it's moving executive business. Now, it gets a little wonky when you're post-cloture. The Senate can't do much in that instance. But that's why the idea that you could take a weekend and do this. And by a weekend, I mean, Thursday to a Monday. Well, you weren't doing anything then anyway, right? So you're not holding up any other business. Just take all the pain at once, get it over with, and then you remove the excuse also that, committees have to be doing something else. We need to consider this bill on the floor. That's what weekends are for. To get all these noms done because you're not dealing with all the other legislative stuff.
I definitely feel that way with reporters. When someone says, I say, why didn't you make that deadline? Well, I didn't finish yesterday. Well, you were off Slack at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
If you've got a deadline, then you're working late. That seems to be the case for many jobs. A lot of the modern economy, you can kind of take your work home with you, but you have to finish it. And if you have to stay at the office late, whether every other job in Washington, D.C., whether you're a lobbyist or a lawyer or a bartender needs to clean the job after a shift or a trash man on the Monday morning, you have to finish your route before you get to go home. That seems so foreign to the Senate. The
urgency of obligation, right? That's what all of us have to deal with in every other capacity of life.
I always pull the overnighters.
Yeah, but the Senate it's just sort of, they don't feel the urgency, and they don't feel, they're like, oh yeah, it's our obligation, but we'll get to it when we get to it. We're prioritizing. And it's like the urgency that the rest of us feel about this project, right? About the Trump administration, especially year one and getting all this stuff done, for whatever reason is not seem to be shared by Senate Republicans. And that's going to be a huge issue. Because I think all of us look at this first year of the Trump administration and we think this is really it, right? We have a midterm election coming. No one knows the outcome of that. So to use both branches of government and the White House, so much of what the president wants to get done has to happen this year. And he cannot do it without his people. He cannot do it with 30 of his nominations sitting on the calendar, waiting until July or August. It just will not happen. And so I think that's why, a lot of us are looking at the Senate and being like, WTF, guys? Like, what are you doing?
It reminds me of this post office up in Townley Town where I used to live, where the guy would occasionally remind the long line of agitated people, calm down, everybody. This is the post office. You are at the post office. Things move very slowly here. And it actually kind of worked. But it seems to me, what I'm hearing from you, the secret is takeout and a room where senators can slowly work a buzz on. They'll be happy with that?
Booze helps a lot of circumstances. This is true.
It truly
everywhere
does.
In the country, including the United States Senate.
It is legislation's natural lubricant. Rachel Bovard, thank you for joining us. Where can people follow your work on social media and find your many writings?
So I'm on X at Rachel Bovard. You can find my many opinings and musings in The Federalist, in Commonplace Magazine, Washington Examiner, all your favorite outlets.
Perfect. Thanks again.
Thank you.